My grandson was left on the porch at Thanksgiving, so I opened my late wife's secret will. When I arrived at my daughter's house for Thanksgiving, her husband said, "Leave Eli outside. He needs respect." I wrapped my shivering grandson in Ruth's quilt and drove away. Security footage shown. 20 degrees Fahrenheit bruises, report. The old Ford's heater blew lukewarm air that smelled of dust and time, doing little to fight the November chill seeping through the floorboards. It was the same truck Ruth and I had bought 20 years ago, and now her side of the bench seat felt as vast and empty as the Ohio fields stretching out on either side of the highway. Just 2 weeks. That's how long it had been since I'd buried her, since the world had tilted off its axis and left me spinning in a quiet, gray twilight. 48 years. You think you're prepared for the silence, but you're not. It's a physical weight pressing in on you. Thanksgiving. The word itself felt like a lie. I was grateful for what exactly? For a house full of ghosts and a heart that felt like a hollowed-out gourd? But Dana, my daughter, had insisted. "Dad, you can't be alone today, please." So I drove, the worn steering wheel slick in my hands, a Tupperware of Ruth's famous sweet potato casserole on the seat beside me. It was the last thing she ever taught me how to make, her frail hands guiding mine over the cinnamon and brown sugar. It felt like carrying the last piece of her with me. Pulling into Dana's suburban neighborhood was like entering another world. Manicured lawns, big 2-story houses with wreaths on every door, smoke curling invitingly from chimneys. Hers was the one at the end of the cul-de-sac, every window blazing with a warm, golden light. Laughter spilled out as I killed the engine, a bright, sharp sound that made the loneliness in my truck feel 100 times deeper. For a moment I just sat there, clutching the steering wheel, trying to build up the strength to pretend I was okay. That's when I saw him. A flicker of movement on the front porch, huddled in the shadows by the door. At first I thought it was a bundle of blankets left outside, but then the bundle shifted, and I recognized the thin frame of my grandson, Eli. My blood ran cold. It was 20 degrees out here, the wind sharp enough to slice right through a coat. And Eli was just sitting on the top step, his arms wrapped around his knees, shivering so hard I could see it from the truck. I got out, the squeak of my old work boots on the pristine concrete driveway sounding like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. As I got closer, the smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon hit me, wafting from the kitchen vents. It was a cruel contrast to the sight of my grandson, his face pale and his lips tinged with blue. "Eli, what in God's name are you doing out here?" He looked up, his eyes wide and fearful. He was 18, a man by most measures, but in that moment, he looked like a lost little boy. He tried to force a smile, but his jaw was trembling too much. "Hey, Grandpa, I'm just getting some fresh air." Fresh air? It was like breathing in shards of ice. I could see his breath puffing out in white clouds. He was wearing nothing but a thin hoodie and jeans. I put my hand on his shoulder and I could feel the tremors rattling his entire body. "Don't lie to me, son. Why are you locked out?" He flinched, his gaze dropping to the porch steps. "It's nothing. I talked back. Travis said I needed to learn some respect." Travis. my daughter's husband of 5 years. A man with a firm handshake and an easy smile who always talked about discipline and how kids these days have it too easy. I'd never liked the way he looked at Eli, like he was a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be loved. Inside the house, another burst of laughter. Dana's laugh. Didn't she know her son was freezing out here? A hot, protective anger started to bubble up from the depths of my grief. What lesson needs frostbite? What kind of respect is earned by leaving a kid on a doorstep in the cold while you feast inside? My own sorrow felt heavy and suffocating, a weight in my chest. This was different. This was a sharp, righteous fire. Eli saw the look on my face. "Don't, please, don't knock. He'll just make it worse for me later." He was conditioned to this. Conditioned to blame himself, to accept the punishment, to protect his tormentor. The thought broke my heart all over again. I looked from his shivering form to the warm, glowing windows of the house, a home full of family, locked against its own. Without a word, I turned and walked back to my truck. The Tupperware of Ruth's casserole seemed to mock me from the passenger seat. I pushed it aside and reached into the back, pulling out the old quilt that always lived there. It was a patchwork of flannel shirts I'd worn out over the years, stitched together by Ruth's loving, patient hands. It smelled faintly of her, of cedar and lavender. I walked back to Eli and wrapped the quilt around his trembling shoulders. He sank into its warmth, a sob catching in his throat. He buried his face in the soft fabric. "Grandpa, please," he whispered, his voice muffled. "Don't let him see you." I looked up, and for the first time, I noticed the small dark lens of a security camera glinting under the eaves of the porch. A silent, digital witness to the whole pathetic scene. That was it. I wasn't going to stand by. Not anymore. I put my arm around my grandson, the quilt crinkling around us both. "Come on, son. You're not staying here." He looked up at me, his eyes a mixture of hope and terror. "Where are we going?" "I don't know yet," I said, my voice thick. I helped him to his feet, his legs stiff with cold, and guided him toward the old Ford. As I settled him into the passenger seat, wrapping Ruth's quilt tighter around him, I glanced back at the locked front door, at the warm house that had no warmth in it at all. I started the engine, and as we pulled away from the curb, leaving that picture-perfect Thanksgiving behind, I muttered to the empty space beside me. "Ruth, what did you leave us?" The first thing I did when we got back to my place was crank the furnace. The old unit roared to life in the basement, its familiar hum a comforting sound in the echoing silence of the house. I sat Eli down at the kitchen table, still wrapped in Ruth's quilt, and made him a cup of hot cocoa, the way she used to. He held the mug with both hands, trying to stop them from shaking, and stared into the steam as if it held the answers to everything. He looked so small. "You're not the problem, kid," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "The lock is." He just nodded, not meeting my eyes. That's when I saw the faint, yellowish shadow of a bruise on the back of his hand. My jaw tightened. I drove him to the urgent care down the street. The antiseptic smell of the clinic was sharp and clean, a world away from the cloying sweetness of turkey and cinnamon. The nurse was a kind woman with tired eyes who took one look at Eli's pale face and hustled us into an exam room. The report was clinical and damning. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, and, as she discreetly pointed out under the harsh fluorescent light, faded, hand-shaped bruises on his upper arms. Old ones. My heart felt like a block of ice. While she was out of the room, I took a few pictures with my phone. The images were stark and undeniable. Silent testimony. Back home, the phone rang. It was Dana. Her voice was thin, stretched between apology and justification. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Travis told me what happened. He was just trying to teach him a lesson. Eli's been so moody." "He left your son on a porch in freezing weather, Dana." "I know, but things have been hard," she stammered, the words tumbling out. "Travis got laid off 2 months ago. He didn't want anyone to know. We're in debt, Dad. He's just so stressed, obsessed with order, with things being a certain way. He says he's trying to toughen Eli up for the real world." I didn't have the words for her weakness, for her excuses. "He's safe here," and hung up. I couldn't settle. The quiet house felt wrong. I needed a piece of Ruth, something to hold on to. I found myself up in the attic, the air thick with the smell of cedar and old paper. Her sewing box was sitting on a dusty trunk. Ruth wasn't much of a sewer in the end, but she was a world-class organizer of odds and ends. She left me notes in flour tins, figures she'd leave something important in a thimble box. Inside, beneath a tangle of thread and buttons, was a small, leather-bound notebook. Her vocational journal. Ruth had spent 20 years as a guidance counselor at the local trade school. The pages were filled with her neat, looping script, notes on apprentices, sketches of tools, thoughts on how to help troubled kids find their way. My grief gave way to a wave of warm nostalgia. I could almost hear her voice in the words. Then I saw an entry near the back, dated 6 months ago. The handwriting was a little shaky. It read, "Frank Carter is a good man, but a quiet one. He sees the storm but doesn't always know how to raise the sail." Below it, a line was underlined twice. "If the home grows unsafe, the truth must speak in public." Tucked into the spine of the journal was a small, flat key, a safe deposit box key. It clicked against the ceramic of the kitchen dish where I put my own keys. A small, metallic sound full of portent. Ruth knew. She must have seen the bruises, felt the chill coming off Travis long before I did. She saw the storm coming for her grandson, and, knowing she wouldn't be there to face it, she'd prepared. This journal wasn't just a collection of memories, it was her moral will. A map left for me to follow. My helplessness began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning resolve. The grief was still there, a heavy anchor in my soul. But now it had a purpose. I went back to the living room. Eli had fallen asleep on the couch, the patchwork quilt rising and falling with his steady breaths. Meta, sex, 0.05. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe too. I looked at the old journal and the small brass key sitting on the counter. She had left us a way forward. I sat in my armchair, the hum of the furnace filling the quiet house, and watched my grandson sleep. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of my wife. "Tomorrow, we open what she left." The air in the bank vault was cold and still, smelling of metal and old paper. It felt like a tomb. Eli stood beside me, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The quiet hum of the climate control the only sound. A bank officer with a practiced, somber expression led us to a small, wood-paneled conference room, where the lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, was waiting. So were Dana and Travis. Dana wouldn't meet my eye. She looked pale and exhausted. Travis sat ramrod straight in his chair, wearing a suit a size too tight, his expression a mask of impatient authority. He was here to claim what he thought was his. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Mr. Abernathy, a dry man who looked like he'd been born behind a mahogany desk, cleared his throat. We are here to execute the will of Ruth Carter. Per her instructions, this reading is to be attended by all present parties. He slid a pair of glasses onto his nose and lifted the first document from a crisp manila folder. The paper was thick, official. He began to read in a monotone voice that stripped all emotion from the words. It was a standard will, at first. Sentimental items, a few charitable donations. Then he got to the main assets. The house, the savings, the investments. A lifetime of hard work and careful planning. And so, all remaining property, real and financial, I bequeath to my daughter, Dana Bishop, to be managed under the financial advisement of her husband, Travis Bishop. A gasp escaped Dana's lips. Eli flinched as if he'd been struck. I just sat there, the blood draining from my face. The words hung in the sterile air. To be managed by Travis. Nothing for me. Not a dime. Not a tool from my own workshop. Not a book from the shelves we built together. It was a public disownment. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sickening. Beside me,
Ruth wasn't cruel. This wasn't her. My gaze fell upon the large, sealed envelope that Mr. Abernathy had set aside. It looked like the primary document. Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice hoarse. That envelope. Were there special instructions? The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Yes, highly unusual. Mrs. Carter stipulated it was not to be opened unless a specific lyrical phrase was provided as a key. Travis scoffed. What kind of nonsense is this? The will is clear. I ignored him. My heart was pounding. It had to be this. I looked at the lawyer, my mind racing back 48 years to a dance hall and a scratchy record player. The phrase is, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Mr. Abernathy's eyebrows shot up. He consulted a small, sealed note from Ruth's file, nodded once, and picked up the envelope. That is correct. With a small, sharp knife, he slit the top. The crackle of the heavy paper was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. He pulled out not one but several documents, neatly clipped together. His eyes scanned the first page, and his professional demeanor faltered for just a second. It appears, he said slowly, that the document I just read was a preliminary clause. This is the binding last will and testament of Ruth Carter. He began to read again. This time the words were Ruth's true voice. The house, the savings, every last penny. It was all to be placed in a protected trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust, Mr. Abernathy read, his voice now holding a note of reverence, is my grandson, Eli Carter. Eli looked up, his face a mask of disbelief. Travis shot out of his chair. "That's preposterous. He's a kid. We're his legal guardians." Mr. Abernathy held up a hand. "Please, sir, there are conditions." He continued reading. The trust would only become accessible to Eli upon his 25th birthday. Until then, the assets would be managed by the bank. But there was another, more immediate condition. Establish at Meta. Sex is 0.05 to activate the trust and any of its provisions for Eli's education and care. The family had to fulfill a specific task. The four of them, Frank Carter, Dana Bishop, Travis Bishop, and Eli Carter, must complete, as a group, 12 consecutive weeks of community service at the Oakwood Community Center, a total of 120 hours. The room fell silent. Travis's face was a mottled shade of red and purple. This wasn't a reward, it was a sentence, a public chore. Mr. Abernathy then unclipped a final, handwritten letter from the back. Ruth asked for this to be read aloud. His voice softened as he began. "My dearest family, if you are hearing these words, it means the lock on our home has been turned from the inside. I have seen the bruises of the heart and the body, and I cannot leave this world without trying to mend what is broken. This is not a punishment. Justice is not revenge. It is a door unlocked. You have 12 weeks to find the key together. The inheritance is not the money. It is the hope that you can become a family again." My eyes filled with tears. It was her wisdom, her compassion, her unwavering belief in the good that lay buried in all of us. I felt her presence in that sterile room, a wave of gratitude so profound it left me breathless. The lawyer read the final clause, a detail that seemed almost trivial after the emotional weight of her letter. A summary of this will's conditions is to be read publicly at the next annual Founders' Day festival to ensure community oversight and accountability. Travis sank back into his chair, utterly defeated. The public humiliation was the final nail in the coffin of his authority. As Mr. Abernathy began to pack the documents, Dana leaned over to her husband, her face ashen. She whispered, her voice trembling but audible in the deafening silence. "He'll never stand for this in public." The community hall was exactly as I remembered it from 100 pancake breakfasts and town meetings. It smelled of percolating coffee, damp wool coats, and the faint sweetness of cookies laid out on a long folding table. Outside, snow fell in thick, silent flakes, muffling the world. Inside, under the hum of the fluorescent lights, the tension was a living thing. We sat on 4 metal folding chairs in the front row. Me, Eli, Dana, and Travis. It felt less like a family and more like a lineup of defendants. The town was here, our neighbors, members of our old church council, parents of kids Eli went to school with. This was Ruth's jury of peers, and we were the case they had come to witness. Mr. Abernathy walked to the small podium at the front, a microphone squealing with a pop of feedback before he adjusted it. The creak of chairs and a few scattered coughs were the only sounds. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice dry and formal. "We are gathered to fulfill a specific and unusual clause in the last will of Ruth Carter. Her wish was for transparency and community accountability." He didn't embellish. He simply laid out the facts, his tone as objective as a news report. He started with the will itself, reading the clause that required this public meeting before the community service could begin. Then, he moved to the evidence. On Thanksgiving Day, the official recorded temperature in our town was 20 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind chill making it feel closer to 10 degrees. A low murmur went through the crowd. At the request of the Carter estate, I have reviewed the findings of a medical report from that evening. He paused, letting the words sink in. The report notes a case of mild hypothermia and documents the presence of faded, pre-existing contusions. Dana flinched, staring at her hands in her lap. Travis's face was granite, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle pulsed near his temple. Mr. Abernathy then motioned to a projector screen set up beside him. I was also provided with a video file recovered from the home's security system. He clicked a button. The screen lit up with the grainy black and white image of Dana's front porch. The timestamp in the corner was a silent accuser. There was Eli, huddled and shivering. Then, my old truck pulling up. The image of me wrapping him in Ruth's quilt was stark and silent. There was no sound, but the story it told was deafening. The footage played for a full minute, and by the end you could have heard a pin drop. "Finally," Mr. Abernathy said, turning off the projector. "Ruth left a recording. She wanted you to hear her voice." He pressed a button on a small tape recorder connected to the microphone. A soft hiss filled the hall, and then, there she was, Ruth's voice. It was a little thin, a little tired, but it was unmistakably her, calm, steady, and full of a strength that reached beyond the grave. "A family should be a harbor," her recorded voice said, echoing slightly in the big room. "A safe place to come home to. But sometimes the storm gets inside. We get lost in our own fear, our own pride. We start locking doors to keep the world out, and we end up locking each other out too. An inheritance isn't about money. It's about what we leave behind in people's hearts. It's about mending what's broken. Love is not a locked door." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Every eye in the room was on Travis, and he broke. It wasn't loud or dramatic. His shoulders just slumped, the rigid posture finally collapsing. He put his face in his hands, and his voice, when he spoke, was a choked, broken thing. "I lost my job," he mumbled into his palms, 2 months ago. "I didn't know what to do. The whole world was spinning out of control. I wanted one thing, just one thing in my life, to be orderly, to show respect." He looked up, his eyes red and pleading. "I was scared." Meta. And I was wrong. Dana began to cry softly beside him. "And I was a coward," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I saw it happening, and I did nothing. I was so afraid of our lives falling apart that I let my own son get hurt." Mr. Abernathy let the confessions hang in the air for a moment before turning his gaze to Eli. "Eli, is there anything you wish to say?" My grandson stood up. He didn't look at his mother or his stepfather. He looked out at the faces of his neighbors, the people who had watched him grow up. His voice was quiet, but clear and steady, without a trace of a tremor. "I just want a door that opens when you knock." The simple truth of it landed like a stone in a quiet pond. Mr. Abernathy formally read the trust's final clause, the 12 weeks of mandatory community service, the apology it represented, and the chance for redemption it offered. As the meeting adjourned, the crowd began to murmur. There was no single reaction. Some people came forward, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder or giving Eli a supportive nod. Others kept their distance, watching Travis and Dana with eyes full of doubt and judgment. The path forward was clear, but it was not clean. The air was split, half hopeful, half deeply skeptical. You could see the question on everyone's face. Will this forced penance actually change a man? Or will he just learn to twist the key to a different kind of lock? 12 weeks can feel like a lifetime, or no time at all. The snow from the winter festival melted. The bare branches of the oak trees began to bud, and a fragile, uncertain spring arrived. The official report from the community center was filed with Mr. Abernathy's office. The conditions of the will had been met. The funds for Eli's future were released into the trust, secure and waiting. On paper, we had won. But life isn't lived on paper. The real changes were quieter, happening in the small spaces between the big events. Eli found a new footing. He started volunteering 3 days a week at the trade school's machine shop, the same one where I'd worked for 40 years. He came home with grease under his fingernails and a light in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a little boy. He was good with his hands, a natural. He'd sit at my kitchen table in the evenings, the furnace humming its low, steady song, scratching away at scholarship forms for a mechanical engineering program. He was building a new door for himself, one that no one could ever lock. Dana started going to adult literacy classes at the library on Tuesday nights. She never said much about it, but I'd see the books on the passenger seat of her car. She was learning to stand on her own 2 feet, to build a life where she wouldn't have to be afraid or dependent. She started coming for Sunday dinners again, just her and Eli. The 3 of us would sit at the old oak table, the smell of my simmering soup filling the house. It was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, a healing quiet. Travis was the ghost at our feast. He completed every single hour of his community service. He showed up on time, did the work, clearing brush at the park, sorting donations at the food pantry, and left without saying a word more than was necessary. On his last day, I heard from a friend on the town council that Travis signed his final timesheet, handed back the fluorescent volunteer vest, and walked out to his car. Before he shut the door, he muttered, to no one in particular, "I did my part. That's enough." He never apologized to Eli. Not a real apology anyway. He offered a grudging, "Sorry about the whole Thanksgiving thing" one afternoon, the words sounding like they were scraped from the back of his throat. He saw the service as a sentence he had served, not a lesson he had learned. The bitterness was still there, a poison just under the surface. He and Dana were living in the same house, but they were miles apart. The family was fractured, maybe for good. Last Sunday, as Eli was telling a story about the new lathe at the workshop, Dana smiled, a real, genuine smile. For a second, it felt like a victory, like we'd made it all the way back. After we finished eating, Eli's phone buzzed on the counter. He went to check it, his brow furrowing as he listened to the voicemail. "Everything all right, kid?" I asked. He looked up, a strange, determined expression on his face. "It's my soccer coach from last year. He's got another kid on the team. Says his stepdad locked him in the garage last night to teach him a lesson. He wants to know if I'd be willing to talk to him." My heart ached. The cycle just keeps turning. But Eli didn't look scared. He looked ready. He just nodded to himself and put the phone in his pocket. After they left, I sat in my armchair, the house silent except for the tick of the hall clock. Ruth's favorite scarf still hung on the coat rack by the door, a soft splash of color in the dim light. Her plan had worked. It had saved Eli. It had given him a future and Dana a chance to find her strength. But it hadn't healed Travis. It hadn't magically pieced our broken family back together. We had the inheritance, but we had lost something too. Her justice was a powerful, brilliant thing. But it only went so far. It could force a man to act, but it couldn't force him.
Meta, but only halfway. And sometimes, halfway is all we get.